Welcome to the Heidi Thorne Show. I'm your host, Heidi Thorne, and in this podcast, I share my real-world self-publishing and small business experience with you. So let's get started with today's show. Now, today is a continuation of the discussion on the self-publishing survey, and where we talked about motivations in the last episode, we're going to talk about the challenges today. Now, I offered in the question on challenges, I offered 13 different options for challenges, and I grouped them into 3 different buckets. There were money challenges, overwhelm, and skill. Now, the money challenges were pretty simple. It's dealing with competition, making money, not knowing about marketing. Overwhelm dealt with time issues, organization, just getting overwhelmed with publishing, and skill factors dealt with writing or production of books. Now, the money challenges, the top 3 challenges for all authors in 2018 were dominated by money concerns. The number 1 challenge was don't know how or where to market and sell my book, which was 36.03% of authors responding indicated that that was their top challenge. The second top challenge was it costs too much at 26.47%. And I'm not making enough money with my books or ebooks was 25.74% of respondents. So in 2016, not knowing how or where to sell a book and not making enough money were tied for the top challenge, and then along with no time. Now, what was interesting is that in 2018, not knowing how or where to market and sell a book was a concern for a greater portion of authors versus 2016. In 2018, it was 36.03%, and in 2016, it was 29.63%. So that's really significant because first of all, we had a bigger group of authors in 2018, and the book marketplace, especially online, continues to get more and more complex and competitive. So it really makes standing out from the competition difficult. So I don't think that's a surprising answer as the top answer of not knowing how or where. Now, costing too much for self-publishing only ranked 6th in 2016, and in 2018 it was 2nd. And that's really significant since a lot of the self-publishing platforms are free, such as Kindle Direct Publishing. But I think authors are finally realizing that even though that's free to publish, it doesn't mean that there are no costs involved. So it could be costs for editing or your book cover design or layout for the internal pages. So costing too much is becoming more and more of a concern. I think they're realizing that, one, they really can't do it all themselves. However, I think that's going to change over time because we have the new Kindle Create tools where you can create your ebook and paperback at the same time. So that's coming down the pike, and those tools are going to get better and better. So I'm hoping that some of the cost factors won't be as much of a factor going forward, but currently it seems to be a greater factor than it was even in the past. Now, in 2016, having no time was tied for the top challenge, and in 2018 it ranked 4th. So it's still pretty high on the list, but the hard dollar cost seemed to be a much greater concern for authors as time goes on. And I think we have to look at, too, in 2016, we had a lot of business owners who were responding to the survey. So definitely not having enough time self-publish would be obvious for that. So it's still an issue, but but the money concerns are much more of a concern. And I'm just overwhelmed by self-publishing was the seventh top challenge in 2018, and in 2016 it was the second ranked challenge. Now that's interesting because the self-publishing systems are getting easier and easier to use. They're much more widely available. And so I think we'll see less overwhelm with the process going on. And we have to remember too that in the 2018 survey, we had more young authors, the 30 and under authors. In terms of younger authors, we had 18.75% of the responding authors were young, and in 2016 it was only 7.6%. So I think as we have a lot more younger authors in the survey, they may be less overwhelmed by some of these online processes because that's what they grew up with. So it's probably less of an issue for them. And in terms of the skill challenge, in 2016, being afraid it won't be good enough and that they'll be embarrassed was in the top 3 challenges. In 2018, it was 6th. But here is where it had a really curious finding. The fear of not being good enough and of embarrassment was in the top 3 challenges for 2 groups. Those who had published 2 books and those who had published 3 to 9 books. Now, logically, you would think as authors become more experienced with self-publishing, that some of that being afraid they won't be good enough should naturally dissipate as they become more experienced. But we're not seeing that. And I think part of that is due to the top challenges that were reported, which were, I'm not making enough money, I don't know how to sell or market my book. And I think what they're maybe confused with is that they're thinking their book isn't good enough and that's why it's not making money, or they're continuing books and that's why they're not making enough money, is because they're just not good enough as they go along. So that was just a very curious finding. And what doesn't challenge people? In 2018, only 7.3% of the authors who responded to the challenge question said they can't get motivated. So the drive is there. In spite of all the money challenges, the drive is there. So I guess that's a good thing. And other challenges I did, as with motivations, I allowed authors to write in some challenges that they didn't feel were addressed by the standard answers. And most of them dealt with the standard answers, but we're just expanding on it. Marketing was the big thing, production issues, printing and layout, editing, and then costs. So those were like the standard answers, only they just wanted to put some emphasis on that those were the big challenges for them. Now, we have to look at over half of the surveyed authors, they indicated for their top motivation was that they love writing. Over half of them said it. Now, when you look at the challenges, they're concerned about money. So I'm hoping that their love of writing will help them get over those money challenges, because they're not going to make a lot of money. So I hope they're motivated enough by their love of writing to continue. And when we look at the um, challenges of not making a lot of money, it's really more of a hobby or part-time gig. So instead of being a vocation, self-publishing and writing is probably more of an avocation, more like a hobby or something that you just like to do. And so maybe the money issues just aren't that big a deal. They'll just keep doing it no matter what. And I think in a future survey, I should probably ask, if you knew you weren't going to make much money from self-publishing, would you still do it? I guess I could ask you that. So very curious. And the only other curious thing that I found in the survey was that authors in their 40s, in terms of age, one of their top challenges was have too many ideas and can't organize thoughts. Now that would be logical because one, if it is a part-time gig, they're probably trying to juggle between their regular job and this part-time hobby that they have and family responsibilities and all the other things going on at the peak of their career. So it's not surprising from that standpoint, but they were the only group that had that as a big challenge. So I hope you found this interesting, and I hope it helps you put your self-publishing into perspective. And if it did, I would appreciate it if you would go over to iTunes and give the Heidi Thorne Show a nice rating and review. And while you're on iTunes, don't forget to subscribe to the Heidi Thorne Show so that you don't miss an episode. And if you like to listen to your podcast on other platforms, I'm on Stitcher, I'm on Podbean. The video version is on YouTube. And if you like to listen to it on your Alexa device, just use the AnyPod skill. I would appreciate it if you would share this podcast, this episode, or the show itself with your author friends on social media. And my self-published books are on Amazon at Amazon.com. Just search for my name, Heidi Thorne, and my author page will come up and all my books are there. Now, my audiobooks are also available on Audible and iTunes audiobooks. If you'd like to connect with me, my website is HeidiThorne.com. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. I'll look forward to talking with you again in the next episode. And in the meantime, have a great day.